The Millennium Commission were looking for national projects that would celebrate the turn of the millennium, but also in a way look back at what was important historically to the country. And so that's why we felt the Eden Project, with its great kind of ancestry in the great gardens of England and the tradition of finding plants and building enclosures, answered both the kind of heritage issue, but also thinking about the future and the environment and the importance of plants. Also really gave a strong kind of look to what are the essential things for us in the future. And the wonderful things about greenhouses, all throughout all eras, all ages, is they're always at the forefront of thinking, often being quite ingenious about how they come up with different solutions. And we felt this should be the 21st century ingenious greenhouse. And I remember in discussions with David Kirkland, we thought, what's the most efficient way of enclosing a space? And it's a sphere. That's the minimum surface area to the maximum enclosure. So what about if we re-describe the geometry of Eden as a series of spheres, interconnected spheres that we then push into the quarry? So once we came up with the idea of these interconnecting spheres that created the geometry, the kind of lightest, most efficient way of doing those is to use a geodesic structural form. And there are a number of ways of doing that. And indeed, the kind of hex-tri-hex structure you see at Eden, you find throughout nature. So all sorts of spheres, from pollen seeds to other kind of forms, use that same mix of hexagons and pentagons to create the geometry. But of course, it's most famous by the work of Buckminster Fuller, who created a whole series of very efficient geodesic domes. If you took the air inside Eden, it would weigh around 700 metric tons by volume, which is the weight of the roof enclosing it. And compared to a glass and steel structure, it uses around 1% of the volume of material. So not only is it much more economical, but it's also environmentally, far more efficient. There's been a recent trend in architecture to make shapes just for the sake of making shapes. Nature only does things because it needs to, and it gives it a sense of purpose and functionality. So good architecture should really follow that lead. I think there was a famous German engineer who said, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think that's a little bit of a mantra for us, is that we do things because there's a reason for doing it, and then out of that comes, I think, a greater performance and a greater elegance that also gives more of a timeless characteristic to the final architectural solution.